Just a heads up, ignore the disclaimer at the end of the last video. I have a microphone now. Let's get on with the video. Some people refer to Ghibli movies as Miyazaki movies. He's the face of the company, and as a result he developed a reputation as a nice grandfather figure, one who is intelligent and kind with a beautiful outlook on life fitting with the atmosphere of his movies. The beautiful intelligent outlook on life part is true, but we already established Miyazaki as not as nice of a man to be around. It seems to me that Takahata is the one who really deserved that reputation. He didn't get it because he just didn't make as many movies, and so people were less interested in him as a person. People in Ghibli used to joke around, saying he's descended from a giant sloth. It's because his films always took a long time to make, often releasing way after the deadline and going way over budget. The first movie he directed while working at Ghibli wasn't Grave of the Fireflies, it was this weird 3-hour documentary about a series of canals in Yanagawa. Just like Miyazaki, he's a big environmentalist and perfectionist, which is why they probably became friends in the first place. It went over schedule and over budget, plus you can't market something like this, so ta-da! He worked slower and his films made less money, so Miyazaki kind of took over the spotlight both as a filmmaker and media personality, despite being a douchebag. Way to be understanding and supportive, dude.
最後にして最高のっていうふうなことをちょっと一瞬おっしゃられたんですけども、これが高橋さんの最後の作品になるんでしょうか。最後ですね。
Okay, it's actually everyone, even the fucking founder of Panic. At least he got nicer, I guess. Takahata seemed like a truly nice man, which makes his untimely death all the more unfortunate. And The Tale of Princess Kaguya, his final film, is the one that defines him the most. After My Neighbors the Yamadas became Ghibli's first financial loss, it took him 14 years to release another major movie, which went over schedule and over budget again, and this ended up being the most expensive Japanese film literally ever made. It still is, and no, it didn't make its money back. The long production cycle seems to have been partially due to his perfectionism. He wanted to get so many details right, precise movements and actions that emulate how they look in real life. It really paid off, as the film looks absolutely incredible. Not just in the detail of the movement, the art style itself. It's a clear deviation from Ghibli's trademark style, but the watercolor aesthetic is not only beautiful, but way more appropriate and gives the film much more of a personality. In terms of story, what I love about it is that it feels old without feeling dated. The movie is based on a tale from the 10th century, and it's incredibly accurate to it as well. You'd think after so long the story would not have had as much impact, but instead of feeling stale, the story feels classic, in a way that makes you understand why the story remained relevant for literal centuries. The main characters may not be incredibly complex, but it doesn't take away from their journeys being engagingly personal. There are many tropes used, but they're not cliched. They're executed in a way that's impactful and works for the story it's trying to tell. Take for example the rebellious princess trope. There's a lot of stories like Roman Holiday where the prince or princess gets tired of doing their royal duties. In this film, Kaguya isn't tired of personally being the princess, she's asking, why does anybody have to live like this? What's the meaning of these rituals, these customs, if they only lead to me living like a puppet? There's a lot more meaning behind her actions than just being whiny, and the great execution of this old trope is heavily tied to the other events, conflicts, and themes in the movie, which are also tropes yet incredibly well executed ones. If I had to point out one thing that bothered me, maybe the order the different events, conflicts were introduced and presented should have been different, specifically at the middle of the film. I was invested all the way through, but I think changing the order of certain events could have helped things build up in a way that would have really put me at the edge of my seat and made the experience even better. Also, there's sometimes narration. Why is it there? Get rid of it. This is like the ultimate Takahata film. Everything that gave him his identity as a director was a factor in the making of this movie. Not just in the production details, but in the different ideas and the way they came across. Like environmentalism, his love for nature and humanity, the way he can make everyday actions seem so fantastical, even if they're not portrayed in a fantastical manner. He even adopted some of Miyazaki's trademarks, like feminism and having Joe Hisaishi do the score. It's a real shame he can't make movies anymore. He was a real hidden gem of a human being. So far we had our fair share of incredibly enjoyable films, but now we're getting into the ones I love. Not just guilty pleasures, but films I put up there as some of the best I've ever seen. Films that have something special about them that puts them above so many others. I'm actively passionate about them and will love them until the end of time. And yes, one of them is motherfucking Ocean Waves, number 8 on my list. Tales from Earthsea is the most common answer for worst Ghibli movie, and I feel like this is the second closest. People just don't seem to like this one much. While I disagree, I can perfectly understand why. What is probably people's biggest issue with the movie is the characters and how goddamn unlikable they are. My take on this is, that's the point. Let me elaborate. Ocean Waves' relative obscurity means that most people who watched it also saw a lot of other Ghibli movies before this, and a common idea behind many of them is nostalgia. The majority of the film is flashbacks and it's all about a high school romance, so naturally, people thought it's like Poppy Hill, or Only Yesterday, or even Porco Rosso, that the fact it's about the past is supposed to be a charming thing, that it's supposed to be pleasant and inviting in some way, but that's absolutely not the case at all. It's supposed to make you think back on the embarrassing stupid bullcrap you did as a teenager and think, wow, I was an overly hormonal little shit, wasn't I? Throughout the entire film, characters don't say what they mean, they have no idea how to deal with their emotions or communicate them, they often lie to people or even straight up manipulate them. The idea of the movie is looking back on the past and with your newfound wisdom as an adult, realizing your mistakes and getting a whole new perspective on things. Or, as the film literally puts it at one point, you realize your world was too small back then. I love stories where when characters talk, there is so much hidden between the lines. With how the theme of the movie is miscommunication, Ocean Waves is a goldmine for that. It never spells out what the characters are actually feeling and it's almost never obvious. But in every single scene there's projection or anger that hides insecurity or something like that. People didn't want to see Rikako and Taku end up together because it didn't make sense for them that they would be in love after all the terrible shit they put each other through. The romance in this movie isn't about that. It's about how Taku grows up. He now realizes why Rikako behaved the way she did. He now realizes what kind of people they were actually like, and so he realizes why he even liked her in the first place. It's strangely similar to my own experiences with the movie. The first time I watched it, I liked it. I was aware these characters were terrible people, and yet I still enjoyed watching the film. I just had a hard time explaining to myself why. The second time I watched it, I started picking up the meaning behind the movie. It was theories at first, but they were totally confirmed for me once the line I mentioned earlier was uttered. My first experience, I guess I subconsciously picked up the film had a specific intent. Like Mr. Plinkett says, you may not have noticed it, but your brain sure did. Which is a sentence that explains the attraction between the two leads, and so I fell in love with the movie. It's far from perfect, however. Not only are there some weird editing choices, it can be overly melodramatic at times, to the point where it becomes somewhat comical and yet overly cruel at the same time. Oh, and let's bring up the friendship between the main character Taku and Yutaka, because their friendship is very deeply explored in the movie. The purpose of said friendship is to affect the relationship between Rikako and Taku, be affected by it later and have somebody important to Taku, who isn't Rikako, yet was still affected negatively by the relationship, help him reflect on the past, realize what happened, and give the audience the satisfying feeling that these characters progressed and moved past everything. That moment being on a pier, during a very romantic sunset. For me it was a satisfying moment of reflection, but for others it was a sign that there was a romantic connection between the two, especially considering it was established they were incredibly close. Yutaka isn't a very complex character and doesn't get much screen time, especially when compared to the other two. I think he served his role in the story very well, but couple everything I said about him, plus how people didn't like Rikako and found the main romance forced, and some people started to see this as a gay romance instead. Some people even started to theorize that this is a gay movie rewritten to be a straight movie. There's a video about this topic that's very well made and I think you should check out, but I think it's very clear I don't see this film that way. I love the way this movie is, and I didn't even mention the soundtrack, which is one of my favorites from Ghibli. This is actually yet another effort to develop young talent in Ghibli, the earliest one. Everybody from the director to the writer to the animators were all relatively inexperienced. The film may not have been made by an established auteur, but the psychology of teens and young adults is very clearly an idea these people were passionate about. This is a labor of love. The film went Takahata though, and the director developed a peptic ulcer due to stress. So I guess they decided not to do full-scale younger talent projects anymore. So to close things off, I obviously love this movie. I think it tackles its subject matter in an excellent manner. It's one that only gets better the more I think about it, and I really hope that someday it'll get its deserved reputation as a fantastic piece of art. Now we get to what is easily the most obscure movie on this list for the simple reason that it still doesn't have an official release outside of Japan, meaning a copy is insanely expensive. It also looks like this for some reason. Ew. Which is a shame because Gush the Cellist is fucking great. It's based off of a short story by Kenji Miyazawa, who the fuck is this, but it feels a lot more like an Aesop's fable. It's a story about a struggling musician, who's also kind of a giant douchebag, being visited each night by a different animal which asks him to play a different song for them. The growth of Gush as a person and as a musician is the core of the movie, and it heavily relies on the music. Luckily, each scene lets you soak in the music being played, and each musical choice is absolutely on point. Beethoven's Sixth, for example. Its purpose is to evoke the imagery of a countryside, and oh look, there it is being played over a countryside, which is where Gush lives. These musical choices not only fit tonally, they show a deep understanding of what makes music, specifically classical music, so special. The atmosphere created by the soundtrack is so strong and meaningful, it actually made me appreciate music more. The movie might be only 16 minutes long and very simple, I mean describing the story in detail should take less than 5 minutes, but it's the execution through the presentation which makes it as special as it is. I think the film would have been better if it ended a bit earlier, but just like Porco Rosso, I think the important thing is the journey and not the destination, especially since the destination doesn't really ruin anything in this case. This was one hell of a journey too, once again showing that the founders of Ghibli were great even before Ghibli existed. I normally wouldn't promote piracy, but this is a special case. Check it out on YouTube. Even if you don't like it, it's not like it'll be a big waste of time. Let's just get right into this one since I don't think a lead-in is necessary here. Kiki's Delivery Service is the literal most wholesome movie I've ever seen, so far anyway. It's so life-affirming in a way that's inspiring, but it doesn't come at the expense of an actual conflict. I never read the book this film is based on, but apparently it's much more episodic. The ways all these different conflicts and side characters are tied together, how every part of the story builds upon the next, and how everything eventually culminates, it's all something Miyazaki thought of himself. That's super impressive. Only yesterday showed us how hard it is to turn something episodic into a coherent narrative, and Kiki's Delivery Service fucking got it. No new addition feels forced or unnecessary, the new elements are indistinguishable from the old. One of the elements that helps the story structure is Kiki's growth and struggles. She's a multi-dimensional, multifaceted, fully realized character. Her age plays into how she interacts with other people, for example, hiding insecurities with animosity and so on. She develops and grows into somebody more mature and experienced as the narrative goes. She deals with personal struggles that many people striving to become independent, both young and old, can relate to. It captures these struggles in a way that's fantastical, sure, but you feel the weight it puts on Kiki emotionally. It could have tackled themes of identity, belonging, and self-love by having an old man shout at her that they don't accept witches around here or something, but Miyazaki knew to think through the implications of these kinds of storytelling decisions. He knew that more people, especially kids, would listen to something with a pleasant personality rather than an unpleasant one. It may be a kid's film, but Miyazaki knows that's exactly the kind of film that needs to be mature, because he knows art is an important tool to help young children understand the world around them. When actually thinking about how the messages are conveyed, that's when you realize how intelligently written Kiki's Delivery Service really is. It's a movie that only gets better as you get older. The main setting, the town of Koriko, was perfectly designed to be an inviting place. It's at no point hostile, yet by no means perfect. It's not used to witches, but it doesn't hate them. It is a place that is kind of foreign but unique and magical as well. Its architecture is a mix of many European towns, and the technology shown in the movie is old, yet the movie never explicitly states when it takes place. It makes Koriko and the world of Kiki's Delivery Service by extension become a place that almost exists outside of time and space, yet not alienating to us mere mortals. Otherworldly in ways, yet so familiar in many others. A fucking map was designed for this place in order to make every environment feel connected and the whole world feel alive. Something that, once again, is also reflected in the animation, character design, and music. I love how Miyazaki and Takahata's characters don't have some basic model, their shape almost changing with every frame, yet it's not jarring at all. I had a hard time previously describing why exactly Goro's animation feels less lively, and now I can. There are so many little touches emulating real life in their films, it's hard not to feel like their creations are living and breathing. A common complaint is how the climax may be a bit bombastic, especially since the rest of the film is so reserved, but that's also kind of what makes it a satisfying climax at the same time. How it's a much bigger set piece than anything else in the movie. My personal complaint is this scene, this kind of contrived conflict that seems like it's out of a C-grade Saturday morning cartoon. We needed to deliver this cat toy that we lost, but it conveniently looks like my real cat, so we'll have to pretend to be the toy until I get back. It's not an unnecessary conflict and it's not annoying, but it's the only part of the movie that, when it shows up, I think, move on to something else. How can I be mad at this movie though? It's such a pure, enchanting little gem, no pun intended. I can't not put it up this high.
One day, Miyazaki sat in front of a train station to do some field work. He carefully observed the same thing all day long: the skirts of young women passing by. A whole day watching women's skirts move as they walked. What he saw that day was reflected in his next film. Here it is. Miyazaki's next film was a message for the young women of Japan.
Okay, so I didn't include this clip because I'm accusing anybody of anything. I know that this, combined with the John Lasseter thing, has unfortunate implications, but no, I'm not saying Miyazaki is a sex pervert if that's what you think. I'm just trying to ask, this is a documentary by Ghibli, about Ghibli, not trying to put them in a bad light or anything. What the fuck does this... if you know what this means, leave it in the comments below. What the fuck does this mean? Thanks, I love you, bye. Here we go, the film that's most often considered to be Ghibli's best. One of the highest rated movies on both IMDb and Letterboxd, the winner of Best Animated Feature, the film that to this day is still the highest grossing in Japan, the movie that's often considered one of, if not the absolute best anime movie ever made, animated movies period, and one of the best movies of all time, Spirited Away. Yeah, it's pretty much as good as people say it is. The reason I like Spirited Away so much comes from how it handles its universe. Howl's Moving Castle was needlessly confusing because Sophie seemed to perfectly understand things that to me were not clear at all. It created an immediate disconnect. I had a much harder time being invested because of this. This is absolutely not an issue with Spirited Away. We learn about this universe through Chihiro. We know pretty much only what she knows, and she does what most of us would do if we were in her place. The film doesn't over-explain or under-explain anything. It lets us get sucked into this world naturally. Another important aspect is that despite not knowing all of them, we know this world has rules. It has businesses, currency, transportation, work, train tickets. Things don't just happen out of nowhere. Every story beat is a logical continuation of the previous, one we as humans who are still used to Earth can understand for ourselves. Background characters often come into the spotlight or have larger roles than you'd imagine. The inhabitants of this world have motivations you can identify with. First impressions and appearances are often deceiving. Disney's original Alice in Wonderland is a good movie, but you can't really get sucked into the world the same way because it's mostly just weird for the sake of being weird. This film is interesting for way more reasons than just the fact that it's strange. The only exception I can think of is the way the relationship between Hako and Chihiro culminates, which is the exact opposite of everything I said and seems to exist only to have an overt environmental message in the movie again. It's an incredible feat how well this film balances logic with magic and wonder. The decision not to over-explain makes this universe that much more intriguing. The Spirit World never ceases to present new and interesting themes, ideas, and characters. People love this movie so much because it managed to take them on a roller coaster, where every line in the rail is an equivalent to seeing something they've never seen before, or experiencing something they've never experienced before. Chihiro is not just a vessel for the audience. She's a fully developed character which experiences real growth and makes her own decisions that define her. Yubaba isn't just an evil witch, she shows weakness when trying to run her business as best as she can, and when caring for her son. The iconic No-Face has a ton of different roles in the story, and despite not having a voice, is also incredibly complex and interesting. The film is filled with beautiful locations and set pieces. I think some of the ways that digital animation is combined with the hand-drawn is incredibly jarring, but the hand-drawn animation is so good it sort of makes up for it. Joe Hisaishi did the score, so I don't even need to finish the sentence. It's Spirited Away, what more can I really say? If you somehow never saw it for whatever reason, you're definitely missing out. My Neighbor Totoro is the best kids film ever made, hands down. I haven't seen every kids movie, but I highly doubt my opinion will ever change. Just like Kiki, the film only gets better as you get older. Just like Kiki, a lot of the film is the main characters doing seemingly mundane things. But that doesn't mean it's boring, it doesn't mean it's unnecessary, and it doesn't mean there's no conflict. Each scene is precisely written and placed in the story to further make you intrigued by this world and these characters. There's precise build-up and genuine tension. The world may not be under attack by an evil force, the story may only have a handful of similar looking locations, but a film can be a vast emotional experience without being vast in scope. It's not about a grand adventure, it's not even about Totoro, the titular magical element that enters the lives of Satsuki and Mei. It's mostly about them, their fairly normal lives. It is a film people can analyze for years to come, each finding a new way to relate its events to their own lives. Rewatching it is not just experiencing your favorite moments again, it's seeing each scene in a completely new light, now that you know where the story is going or are reminded of a small detail you forgot about. Similarly to Spirited Away, the film refraining from explaining things doesn't make it more confusing, rather incredibly intriguing. For example, it's yet another movie that does not specify what time period it takes place in order to make the setting this magical reality that exists outside our own. And it's in service of the emotional journey, how these two incredible characters learn more about the world around them. There aren't a million and one different Totoro toys just because kids find him cute. He's an incredibly well-designed character, but that's not all there is to him. He's an endearing and lovable way to ease young kids' struggles with actual difficult circumstances. There's legitimate tension here, because you know these characters inside and out and you feel for them. It also shows everything in a very uncompromising manner, especially for a children's movie. Despite being below 90 minutes, it gets across so much and in such a subdued manner. It's more than many 3-hour films can get across. If it seems like I'm exaggerating, well, you might feel that way when you watch it, but this film wouldn't have the following that it has if it didn't have a lot of substance. Remember, it originally didn't do so well financially, so it's not like the adults who love it do so out of nostalgia. My Neighbor Totoro remains beloved after so many years because it's a damn good movie. It didn't entertain kids with flashing colors and constant movements, it did so with the exact opposite. It developed people's imagination, acting upon that fantasy we all had as kids of what if there's something magical where we live that we never noticed. It has profound lessons and messages, room for interpretation, great characters with equally great designs, and an amazing soundtrack even for Joe Hisaishi standards. If there's a film that deserves the label wonderful, it's this one, because it makes so many people from different ages and different countries realize the world is that much more quietly beautiful. I don't like Miyazaki as an individual, that much should be clear by now. But while he's incredibly unpleasant when it comes to personal interactions, I do admire him for more than just his talent as a filmmaker. He's incredibly intelligent as well.
地球はどこへ行くんだろう、人類はどこへ行くんだろう、人類がやっていることは本当に正しいのかというその根源的な疑問に真正面から答えないと、その元気に希望を持って生きろと言いながら、本当は子供たちの一番聞きたいことに答えてないことになる。
Once again, I think the documentary Princess Mononoke in the USA is a good watch if you want to see some examples of what I mean. Speaking of which, the man truly understands what's going on in the world, and two subjects that are very prevalent in his films as a result are war/pacifism and environmentalism. Nashiko was his first story about a princess caught up in a large-scale war between humanity and nature, but that doesn't mean he hasn't tried to perfect it since. Princess Mononoke is that vision perfected. It gets rid of all the unnecessary clutter and adds so much more in its place. Instead of Nashiko, which had many different goals in the movie, many of them coming and going as the story progressed, Ashitaka has one. It changes and morphs depending on the circumstances and the occurrences around him. It makes the story easier to follow without sacrificing complexity. Both the human and nature sides have so much more personality now. The side of nature in Ashika didn't exactly have characters, now did it? The creatures of the forest in Mononoke can now talk, and now that they can communicate with the other sides of the conflict and amongst themselves, they are much more interesting. Lady Eboshi, the human leader, can be seen as an overly greedy imperialist who takes advantage of the disadvantaged for her own personal gain, or a brave and admirable leader who's giving the less fortunate than her a chance to live more comfortable lives. Compare her to the female antagonist in Nashika and you see how much more depth was added over the years. While I'd still dub Eboshi a villain, this is not as much of a good versus evil story as it is about controlling the urges every living being has and knowing how to live with them. For example, the black goop that corrupts creatures' minds and makes them violent isn't just random evil goop. It's a metaphor for how hatred spreads during times of conflict and destroys us from the inside slowly. But under the right circumstances and in the right hands, it can actually be used intelligently and effectively to make the situation better. The movie uses its fantasy setting to explore ideas in a less conventional yet still very impactful way. Nashika was lacking in truly entertaining characters other than Nashika herself, but Princess Mononoke has an even better cast of characters than Spirited Away, which is saying a lot. The human and natural sides don't just fight each other, they have disagreements contained between themselves, conflicts of interest, and sometimes people just being blinded by their own goals and emotions. The story is way more than the evil human do bad thing to nature type of narrative many animated kids films follow. It is a deeply complex and mature and disturbing commentary on the relationship between man and nature. Everything I said about Spirited Away's structure applies here, even if this one does need to do a lot more explaining. Not only does the story flow beautifully from each scene into the next, so do the themes. With each scene, more layers are added into the commentary and the messages the movie has to communicate. Princess Mononoke isn't just a one-trick pony, and neither is Miyazaki. I watched this movie 3 times, and each time, instead of finding more inconsistencies, I just found more things to appreciate, which is insane, not just because this is a complicated fantasy setting, it's also because he cannot just make up whatever rules he wants for this world in order to resolve plot holes. Everything here is a metaphor or a stand-in for a real-life counterpart. My Neighbor Totoro may appeal to my personal tastes more, but I can see how difficult it is to create something like Princess Mononoke. Writing something like this takes incredible amounts of dedication and talent. This is one of these movies I'm jealous of because I know I'll never be able to pull off something like them. By the way, you know, great character design, beautiful animation, amazing soundtrack, you know the drill. Even the digital and hand-drawn parts of the animation are really well mixed together. To finish, at the time this film came out, it was the highest grossing film in Japan before being beaten by Titanic and then Spirited Away. It's this movie's success that helped Ghibli become popular in the West, since it's their first feature to be dubbed by Disney. Well, specifically Miramax, which is owned by them. I am mentioning this because, remember Warriors of the Wind? After that disaster, in order to avoid another disaster, Toshio Suzuki famously sent Harvey Weinstein, who produced the English dubbed version of the film, a big fucking katana which said no cuts on it. The verse being incredibly aggressive towards someone aged so well. In so many ways, Whisper of the Heart could have easily ended up being way too cheesy and kind of annoying. Happy, pleasant, coming-of-age romances like this often end up seeming either sappy or insulting. We already saw an example of this kind of story executed poorly. This movie... it's so incredible, I love it so much. Its presentation may not be as overtly creative and fantastical as a Miyazaki movie, but it didn't need to be. The animation and environment design are both great and do a great job of carrying the script. It's not like there aren't any wonderful environments, and this story still has a ton of that Ghibli charm and excellence. Unlike others of its kind, just showing the beauty of love and having an overt sense of humor aren't its only ways of being charming. It does those things, and when it does them well, but it's in combination with other, more clever, more subtle details. It's things like a cat being seemingly intelligent enough to know how to use public transport, or a beautiful antique shop that is this incredibly fantastical. While the likelihood of somebody experiencing the exact same things in real life are very low, they still somehow have the unique quality of feeling real. It uses these small but magical occurrences that you might come across by chance while living your day-to-day life as the basis for the rest of the story. It does so in tandem with fantasy sequences, which are literally wonderful. They're supposed to represent Shizuku's creative mind and the theme of creativity in the movie, and they are appropriately creative. Adding to the charm as well are Shizuku and Seiji's relationship. They have a personality and chemistry and a reason to love each other, and they are so adorable together as a result. Plus, they and other characters of their age in the story actually act like kids. They're immature and inexperienced, and it plays a big role in their dynamic with other characters. I don't very often see a story like this take the character's age seriously. It's not just a romance though, it's a coming-of-age romance. Like in Kiki's Delivery Service, the warm and inviting world is used to help you see life as something more pleasant, and motivate you, the viewer who's experiencing the same personal struggles as this young heroine, to become a better version of yourself. Kiki's Delivery Service is a great movie, as I previously said, but the way Whisper of the Heart nails not only the charm but the message blows Kiki out of the water. The way personal growth is explored here is incredibly precise, to the point where it honestly felt like a big call out to me. There has never been a film I have related to more in my life. I may not be a girl, I may not be in love with a cute boy, and I may be much older than Shizuku, but her emotional journey still hits incredibly close to home. I'm not saying I like this movie because it tackles themes I relate to, Marnie technically did that. The deciding factor is the execution. I too have felt like I'm somehow not good enough, like I'm not growing up or maturing as fast as I wanted to. I too am an aspiring artist who doesn't know how good is good enough, how to manage my work schedule and balance it with my day-to-day responsibilities. I want to be a film director and writer, to create stories that change people's perspectives on their lives, but I don't know where to begin or how to progress. This is a film that I not only relate to, I can confidently say it changed me and my life. It inspired me to make this video. Without this movie you wouldn't be seeing it now. It's a film I think every aspiring artist should see, not only for its messages but also for the ways it conveys them. Magical, charming and yet serious, knowing its audience and not talking down to them. Praising a film for tackling a vague idea you identify with is not much of a compliment, but how about praising a film for succeeding masterfully at what it set out to do? That goal being to charm harm people, inspire them, teach them something about themselves, and help them develop. How it does so in a similar manner to Princess Mononoke, where with each scene the message becomes more intricate and profound. I think that's decent praise, I don't know about you. The only flaw I can really point out isn't really that much of a flaw. It's just that the brief love triangle subplot, while definitely important, is not as interesting as it could have been. The two characters aside from Shizuku involved in it just aren't as interesting, and when I think of this movie, this is the last aspect of it that comes to my mind. Before researching for this video, my impression of Miyazaki was that he's the old man who understands youth better than any other old man out there because of stories like this. I still think he's horribly unpleasant, and I think he should practice the compassion that he preaches more often, but I still kinda think this. He didn't direct Whisper of the Heart, but he did write it. Yoshifumi Kondo directed this movie. He was a man that the studio heavily relied on to be the successor to Miyazaki once he inevitably quit or passed away. Unfortunately, Miyazaki is known for being a big perfectionist and will not hesitate to push his animators to their absolute limits in order to get the best results and on time.
新人に食べるというテーマで絵を描かせた。
本当にこうかね。ちょっとね、テーブルについてみな。ちょっとそれ椅子貸してあげて誰か。まっすぐ、その椅子に座って、君はお母さんと集めてご飯食べるのね。
The Japanese animation industry is notoriously draining, and Ghibli's no exception. It's probably why Hiroyuki Morita and especially Tomomi Mochizuki never came back to direct another film for them. After working his ass off on Princess Mononoke, Yoshifumi Kondo died from an aneurysm induced by overwork. Kondo's death was so devastating to Miyazaki, it prompted the first of many instances where he announced his retirement. I think this adds a lot more to the credibility of my theory in the segment on The Wind Rises, being that Miyazaki probably no longer has the motivation he once had, and only keeps working because it's better than the alternative. After Princess Mononoke, I think the quality of his film slowly started to decline. I love Spirited Away, but it's not as good as Mononoke, and after that the scripts he directed became less and less comprehensible and more messily structured. The scripts he didn't direct felt like empty vessels. In case you hadn't noticed, Princess Kaguya is the only film Ghibli themselves made after Spirited Away that I considered good. Studio Ghibli is not all sunshine and rainbows despite their image. They're not pure evil, of course not, and if my theory is correct, I feel really bad for Miyazaki. However, I came to realize how much Ghibli values productivity over creativity. That's why everybody was so mean to Takahata earlier, because he worked slowly. This emphasis is how Kondo ended up dead. So in case I did not make it clear, I love this movie. I love it from the very bottom of my mortal soul. It holds a special place in my heart no film will ever replace. What happened behind the scenes of this movie doesn't change that for me. I will love it to the end of time, and I haven't even mentioned everything I love about it, but this segment is already long enough. I can separate the art from the artists, it's just that I never thought I would say that about Ghibli. Okay, no bullshit this time. No sad stories, no weird behind the scenes details, no criticisms of the studio, just a review this time. Any more thoughts I have, I'll say for the conclusion segment after this. Simply put, Grave of the Fireflies is one of the best movies I've ever seen. There is not a goddamn thing I would dare say needs or should be changed about it. It's an absolute masterpiece. A lot of people know this as the incredibly sad Ghibli movie. I'm here to tell you it's so much more than that. Films like this aren't good because they're sad. Films should be sad because they are good. Grave of the Fireflies isn't depressing just because it shows kids suffering through World War II. It doesn't just present a sad idea or concept and expects you to praise it as a masterpiece. The actual first scene shows the main characters being dead, and the rest of the movie is a flashback. If kids dying is all it had in it, it would have ended there. It earns those emotions, it immediately conveys to you it's not completely about the result as much as it is about the circumstances that led them to their unfortunate death. These kids feel like they've been plucked straight out of real life. Seita is young and inexperienced, he's blinded by emotion and his own subjective understanding of the world. Setsuko is an incredibly accurate depiction of a 4-year-old. You'd expect a movie like this to criticize war, and of course it does, but that's not all it does. It criticizes the environment that let these kids suffer the way they did. It criticizes the adults who never offered help, the ones who never really understood they have it much better than these kids do. It criticizes the culture that glorified this war, said glorification making their struggles even more cruel and punishing. Every scene is like a new opportunity to say something new and interesting, all connecting back to the main focal point of the story. I kept having my own interpretation of this film for so long, but while looking up other reviews and analyses, it seems a ton of people had a different one. I thought it was about inevitability, while a lot of other people seem to think it's about pride. It's a testament to how this film can still be incredibly effective no matter how you look at it. It's dense, but it doesn't demand you understand everything about it, rewarding discussion and multiple watches. The sound design, animation, and voice acting in this film are all top-notch. While watching this movie, I keep forgetting it's animated. I keep forgetting this box of candy is a drawing and not something real people were interacting with. Ironically enough, this is perhaps the Ghibli film that feels the most alive. It actually has the same type of life-affirming charm many of the other Ghibli movies do. There's moments I can't help but feel happy, and no, it's not distracting at all. Quite the opposite actually, it shows how innocence can prevail even in the darkest of times. Poverty is not all browns and grays in real life, and even suffering people have glimmers of happiness. The new context for this familiar feeling adds so much depth. Nobody could have made this film as good as it is except for this studio. Who else would make something like this? Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks? Even if they had the balls to talk about something like this, they wouldn't do it nearly as well. It's the fact that Ghibli sees animation as a medium, like it really is, and not a genre, that helped them make so many unforgettable experiences over the course of their existence. Their lows aren't as low and their highs are way higher than anybody else's. I wouldn't dare say more about this movie, because even if you won't love it as much as I do, you still won't be able to deny it's a one-of-a-kind experience. One I don't want to rob anyone of. It's my favorite war movie, my favorite coming-of-age story, my favorite film of 1988, my favorite film of the entire 80s, and one of my favorite films of all time. Number 5 actually. I wish I could say it's my favorite animated movie, but maybe I like Anomalisa just a tiny bit more. This is one of few movies I could call perfect, and considering how picky I am, that's an incredibly high bar. That bar was only passed because the studio who made this movie was Ghibli. I wanted to go over somebody's filmography, their history as filmmakers, and review their films as my first serious video. I originally was planning on Woody Allen. It's because I like his style as a filmmaker, making me interested even in his weaker work. However, it was a whole lot of films, a whole lot of research, and I'd have to rewatch a lot of movies I wasn't too fond of for the video. So I switched over to Ghibli, somebody who had the same strengths I mentioned. This was going to be like Animat's videos, which recap the important aspects of Ghibli's history, mixed with my reviews of a film anytime we get to the point in history where it was released. I decided it was way too clumsy and changed it to a best to worst ranking, yet I still wanted to do some research. My opinions of the studio were way more positive before starting this project. Not only did I simply not know stuff like how shitty Miyazaki is, Kondo's death, and other things I brought up, I thought they made way more good movies than this. I didn't want to come in and say Howl's Moving Castle and The Wind Rises aren't good movies, I wanted them to be good. It's when I realized the reputation Ghibli has is exaggerated. Definitely deserved in many ways, but still exaggerated. Is Ghibli the best animation studio in the world? I don't know, but, and I'm sorry to say, with how business-oriented animation is in the West, that's not a tough record to break. Obviously they're better than Pixar, DreamWorks, Disney, Blue Sky, Illumination, Sony Pictures Animation, and Laika. If there's a better animation studio, it's probably something more obscure like Cartoon Saloon, and with the reputation Wolfwalker seems to be getting at the time of this being made, I feel like I'm on the right track. I'm not trying to undermine their influence and success, you just heard me sing praises for a bunch of their films. I am a fan of theirs. It's not like they don't deserve a good reputation. Many of their films are made with a pure and profound intent, as well as a wealth of intelligence and talent, even if they're not the best. I'm just saying, while I'm not as big of a fan of them now, I still really love them, and as a fan I'm saying, please at least consider everything I've said. This is just the tip of the iceberg, honestly. I haven't fully discussed how Ghibli's failure to find a successor largely stemmed from them overworking their crew to the point where their preferred successor could no longer be a successor, meaning their quote-unquote injuries are pretty much self-inflicted. Or how Toshio Suzuki blamed Kondo's death on Takahata despite him dying while working on a Miyazaki movie, hinting that Suzuki might not be alright in the head to say the least. If I had all the time, knowledge, and motivation in the world, this video series would be much longer. You know what people's love and admiration for this studio reminds me of? My love for Adventure Time. I absolutely love this show. It's incredibly imaginative and creative, the animation and music are great, it's got great stylized dialogue, and at times sometimes it can be profound in a way that rivals even some of the most artistic minds in cinema. It makes me feel like a kid again, and while I was a kid when this show was at its peak popularity, it wasn't a big part of my life. It's all due to the quality of the show itself. Almost everything I said right now are things I can confidently say are also strengths of many Ghibli movies. If I had an endless supply of money to throw around, you know what, I'd probably spend a ton of it on Blu-rays, video games, books, comics, toys, and whatever else there is out there. Kind of like I know a lot of Ghibli fans would do with Ghibli merch. Yet as a fan of the show, I can't say it doesn't have its low points. Some episodes are really only entertaining because they have the signature Adventure Time personality, not because their stories are actually good. I also have to say, some decisions made with the direction of the show and some episodes are just idiotic. Like Breezy, that episode is absolute garbage. A similar thing applies to Werner Herzog. He's my Miyazaki, a very nice old filmmaker with a love for life that's reflected in his films, yet not everything he made is good either. Some of it sucks ass, even if it does have a unique charm of sorts. What I'm trying to get at is, don't love something to the point where you can't see its downsides, where it becomes infallible to you. Whether it's a person, brand, company, whatever. At that point you're no longer a fan, you're a cult member. If there's something I didn't expect to learn from researching Ghibli, it's how unhealthy stan culture is. I now view stans as people who are proud to be these metaphorical cult members, and as with anything popular, Ghibli has their stans too. I'm not saying it's bad to be a big fan of something, but too far is too far. Let's bring it back to Adventure Time. In the early 2010s it was like SpongeBob, it was everywhere. But the shift to a more story-heavy structure in its latter half made it lose its personality in many people's eyes and its popularity declined. The difference between Adventure Time and Ghibli is that I'd argue the later Adventure Time episodes, while many of them aren't as good as many of the earlier ones, still had a lot of what made the show special in the first place. Yes, even Breezy. Not only is The Tale of Princess Kaguya literally the only post-Spirited Away movie from Ghibli I'd call good, films like Poppy Hill, Arrietty, and The Cat Returns don't have a shred of that special Ghibli feel to me, they feel like Ghibli copycats. At this rate, Ghibli isn't going to end up like Adventure Time, it's going to end up like Woody Allen, yet another conclusion I never expected to arrive at. While he made a lot of incredible masterworks that will stand the test of time for years to come, it sadly lost a lot of its impact due to him making a ton of unremarkable crap that only seems to try and copy what made him successful in the past instead of doing something new. Ghibli isn't quite at that level, but they're getting there. And just like Woody Allen, I feel like I have to separate Ghibli's movies from their creators now. For different reasons and not on the same level, but still. Although if Woody Allen is going too far in your opinion, Tim Burton is also a good analogy, since he made Edward Scissorhands and somehow spiraled down to Dark Shadows. Just look at these Earwig and the Witch screenshots and tell me I'm not onto something. It's like the reputation A24 has, even if A24 doesn't make movies in-house. At a time where people are clamoring for new ideas, here's a studio that actually provides risk-taking and unique content. I think they're awesome also, and at this point they just seem to be getting better and better. But hey, A24 stands, what are your thoughts on The Sea of Trees? Or How to Talk to Girls at Parties? Or Life After Breath? Or Barely Lethal? Or Backstabbing for Beginners? Even the best have slip-ups. If you like Poppy Hill or The Cat Returns, that's fine. It's not like it makes you dumber or a worse person in any way. Did you see my Ocean Wave segment? I'm a prime target for people shitting on my opinion. Doing this to others for no reason is hypocritical and kind of gross. You wanna flood your house with Ghibli merch because you just love their movies that much? Knock yourself out. Do it. I get it. My wish is that just like how people can admit John Lasseter is a creep and still love Pixar, Disney is an out-of-control monopoly that at times regurgitates the same ideas for the sake of cash and still like a lot of what it made, and DreamWorks made Shark Tale. I want people to admit the flaws with Ghibli too. I don't see them discussed often enough despite how famous they are, and how they started making movies before Pixar or DreamWorks even existed. It's perfectly healthy to admire something with all of your heart, but don't let it blind you. That's all I ask, because if they continue down the road they're taking, just trying to find a Miyazaki clone, the end of Ghibli won't be a bang, but a whimper.
心配になることないですか、スタジオの将来。
スタジオの将来はもうはっきりしてますよ。やっていけなくなります。それはもう目に見えてる。それ心配しててしょうがないです。どうにもならないです。ジブリなんて困ってさ、飛行機の名前で思いついてジブリとか言ったんだから。有名人だからね。